Yevgeny Prigozhin, once upon a time, was known as Putin Chef. He was the man who arranged catering for Putin's big banquets, his show off celebrations. But it's a very Russian story of how you move from that to take on other roles. And the key moment was in 2014. Russia was on the back foot. A pro Russian leader had been overthrown in Ukraine, and Mr. Yanukovych, and Russia was involved in the war to prop up the Assad regime in Syria. So what Prigozhin said is, look, give me the funds to develop your own private army, your mercenaries, called the Wagner Group, and you can use them in various places around the world where you don't want to openly admit you're intervening. That included eastern Ukraine in 2014, when the Russians seized part of that area. It included Syria, of course, and it includes interventions in Africa from Mali to Congo. And Bev, one other thing, it wasn't just military. It was a hybrid warfare that involved the political, because Yevgeny Prigozhin also set up the Internet Research Agency, which was involved, for example, in trying to get Donald Trump elected in 2016 in the United States.
So he's been a real Putin henchman in many, many ways, as you point out. So why suddenly now almost break ranks, become more vocal? Does he have political ambitions of his own?
Now, the key here is that the war in Ukraine isn't just a war abroad for Vladimir Putin's goals. It becomes a war at home because rivals want to vie to get influence. And Yevgeny Prigozhin no longer wanted to be a servant. He wanted to be an equal, arguably a master in some ways. And so he comes out in the open and says, it's my guys, it's my mercenaries that are leading the fight. And indeed, they are. They're being used as cannon fodder in eastern Ukraine in these very high-cost Russian offensives. And he says, as my guys are dying, you should be turning to me rather than your established military commanders or the defense secretary, Mr. Shoigu. And that really was the case last summer, last autumn, that he had the upper hand because Russia didn't want to use its conventional military. But two things have happened that make this rivalry a bit treacherous now for everyone. The first is Russia's not advancing that far in the east, is taking heavy casualties. And secondly, people in the Kremlin now see Prigozhin as a threat. And so they push back, which is, we will turn this war over to our established troops, our specialist forces. We'll stop Wagner recruiting prisoners to put on the front lines, and we'll cut Mr. Prigozhin down to size in the process.
Yes, and do you think Putin's going to support that? Because so publicly almost declaring himself sort of puts him at odds with Putin himself.
Bev, in American football, there's a phrase which is, first of all, you protect your quarterback. And that means Vladimir Putin protects himself. And so since the war isn't leading to this decisive victory that he's hoped for, he plays factions off against each other. So at one point, he favors Prigozhin, and he gets rid of some Russian military commanders, and he blames them for what's going wrong. Now he turns back to some of the Russian commanders, and he blames Prigozhin, or his allies blame Prigozhin for what's going wrong. In other words, as long as Putin can keep the camps around him divided rather than united, even if you want a united front in a war, as long as he keeps them divided, he protects himself.
Yeah. Is it true, though, that Prigozhin and Wagner have been pretty critical in the gains Russia has made? And as you point out, and as we've all witnessed, their gains have been ad hoc and not necessarily as significant as they would have hoped.
They've been essential, Bev, because the key here is the last time Russia had a major gain in Ukraine was in July, last July, when they took territory in the east. Now, after that, they wanted to kick back against a Ukrainian counteroffensive, and they wanted to get a new victory, especially by the first anniversary, but they didn't have the military forces to do it. They had taken a battering, they had supply problems, they had logistics problems, and what Prigozhin said is, I'll use my guys. I will use them up there. And by my guys, he meant going and getting the convicts and just throw them on the front line. So you're talking about tens of thousands of Russians who have been cut down, a lot of whom have been supplied by Wagner. But what have they gained since last July? One town called Soledar, which has a population of about 11,000 people. And beyond that, no breakthroughs, not yet.
Yeah, and the human casualty you have to weigh up. You know, as if we hadn't had enough balloons or balloon types of equipment. Russia seems to be getting in on this surveillance craze. Ukraine says they shot down several Russian balloons. What sort of balloons are these?
Well, Bev, let's ease the worries here. This isn't like the Chinese spy balloons. It's definitely not like the aliens that we keep wondering about. These are different types of balloons. These are balloons that hover over the battlefield and they serve as decoys. And what you do is you try to get the Ukrainian radar to concentrate on these balloons and try to shoot them down rather than shooting at the Russian missiles, the Iranian made drones that the Russians are using. Because it does two things. One is it means your missiles and drones can get through. And two, you hope the Ukrainians will run out of anti air defenses when you step up the campaign, if you can step up the campaign later this year.
Scott, love you making sense of all of this for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bev.